I have a joke for you guys. An old man was driving down the freeway. His phone rang. It was his wife. She said, "Frank, I just heard on the news that there's a car going the wrong way on 96 freeway. Please be careful." And Frank said, "Heck, it's not just one car, it's hundreds of them. So many cars." There are tons of old people jokes out there, and lots of them are funny. They usually have to do with old people's minds or knees or bladders. But what if instead of old people, these jokes were about people with disabilities or debilitating diseases? What we don't stop to consider when we laugh are the terrible ramifications of age. We have this sentimental idea of age. It's silver hair and crow's feet and bouncing grandchildren on your knee. Maybe being a little bit off your rocker. Except it's not. It's not that. It's your body slowly breaking down. It can mean pain whenever you walk. It can mean arthritis and glaucoma. It can mean the shame of needing people to feed you and change your diapers, forgetting the ones you love. Death slowly approaches while your mind decays and your muscles weaken and your skin gets thinner. It's hardly something to laugh at. Maybe we think, what's the harm in laughing when we're all in this together? Aging is a part of our natural life cycle. It's something we just accept. Aging is natural, but so is cancer. Cells sometimes make mistakes when they divide. It happens. Alzheimer's is natural, arthritis is natural, heart disease is natural, but that doesn't stop us from wanting to cure those things. It's like we understand that all the individual effects of aging are terrible and should be addressed, but we never think about trying to cure aging itself. Aging is the main risk factor for cancer, heart disease, and stroke, all things that are most likely to kill us. So why not just cure it? Maybe treating age-related diseases is like putting a Band-Aid on something we could have avoided in the first place. Now, I'm 16. I don't have to think about getting old for a really long time. And though I was originally interested in this because I love science and I'd like to pursue a career in biotechnology, I also care because I'm human. Everyone I know and love is going to die, and I don't want them or myself to go out by slowly decaying. And you shouldn't either. Ultimately, we all will die, but I want to go out with a longer, healthier life. The problem is that this sort of issue isn't really within most people's scope of problems in the world we must deal with. There's virtually no research into the question of how and why we age, much less how to cure it. Most people's first thought is either, what, defeating aging, that's too weird, I don't want to think about that, or that's just impossible. Is it? Let's look at the science. First, we need to consider the basics. One thing a lot of people get confused with when talking about aging is the difference between development and senescence. Development is actually programmed into our DNA. It's the reason embryos turn into babies, turn into adults. It's the biological goal of your body. Senescence is something different. It's the slow accumulation of damage, a sort of cellular wear and tear. As time goes on, the more our cells do, the more junk they produce, and the more mistakes they make when copying themselves. What's amazing is that this wear and tear happens at very different rates for different species. Rats and mice start getting white hair and arthritis at 2 years old, but you've probably seen your dog getting old at 15. The question is, why do some bodies wear out more quickly than others? The leading theory about this has to do with genetic survival strategy. It takes some kind of costly biochemical process for your body to ward off senescence. And your body is only going to bother to do that if it benefits your evolutionary strategy. For example, mice and rats in the wild don't really have a chance to get old. Instead, they're either killed off, or they starve to death, or get some sort of infectious disease. Whereas, the naked mole rat, this lovely creature, doesn't really ever have to deal with the same hardships that mice and rats do. It lives underground without the threat of predators or snow. Its evolutionary strategy is totally different, and it can live to be 35, even though it's a very close relation to mice and rats. Evolution kind of says, do you want a machine that spends more resources on reproducing or on living longer? It depends on your evolutionary environment. Like naked mole rats, humans were pretty good at warding off predators and surviving, so we became one of the longest lived animals, which means that our bodies are pretty good at fighting off the effects of age, at least better than mouse and dog bodies. The question is, could we do this even more effectively? Well, there are two basic approaches. One is to find a range of therapies to address all the individual aspects of cellular age. So one for the junk that is the byproduct of metabolism, one for worn out cells that refuse to die, one for mutations, and so on. This is the sort of approach taken by Aubrey de Grey, a leading proponent in the fight against aging. The idea here is sort of like taking really good care of a Model T Ford. Maybe someday we'll figure out a way to redesign the engine, but for now we change the oil, replace parts that are wearing out, and flush the carburetor. You do all this and maybe it runs forever. The other approach has to do with getting your body to continue to keep the systems it already has in place for addressing cellular age active. In some cases, in animals, tweaking a single gene can actually postpone all of the effects of age. For example, this little worm called C. elegans. Scientists like to use this worm because its genetic composition is incredibly simple. A team led by Cynthia Kenyon found a way to double the lifespan of this worm simply by tweaking the activity of a gene that controlled a specific hormone receptor. Incredibly, these mutant worms, lived twice as long as the original ones, and they were perfectly healthy and normal even as the original worms were getting old and dying off. Basically, flipping this genetic switch made the C. elegans body work harder to counteract the effects of cellular age. Another way to get animals' bodies to fight aging is to drastically restrict their diet. So this, in many animals, actually triggers a series of biochemical cellular changes aimed at protecting and preserving cells. In mice, when put on a diet that provided all the necessary nutrients, but still sort of made the caloric intake of their diet very, very low, they lived 40% longer than normal. A similar effect has been seen in monkeys. Scientists are now trying to figure out a way to trigger the same cellular changes without such a harsh diet. If all of this sounds pretty speculative, that's because it is. We don't really know how all of this translates into humans. In a way, we don't even really know how hard or how easy this problem is. It's kind of like the problem of curing infectious diseases versus curing cancer. It was relatively easy to cure infectious diseases compared to curing cancer, but we only really understood the complexity of the problem when we actually threw all of our resources at it and really tried hard. This we have not done when it comes to aging. So why is it that there's so little interest or funding? One reason is because it's sort of this terrible, inevitable thing that we don't really like to confront, so we actively avoid thinking about it. Other people have certain objections, so let's take a look at the main ones. Probably most people's first worry about defeating aging is the problem of overpopulation. I think this is a hard problem, but we should put it in perspective. First, no one really says, you know, let's not cure cancer and heart disease because then there would be too many people in the world. And I am really only talking about curing the single main risk factor for those things. Secondly, the problem with an increasing population is the strain it would put on the Earth. But right now, primarily, it's not how long we live, but how we live that negatively impacts the planet. For example, switching to a vegan diet can cut your carbon emissions and greenhouse gas production in half. So in a way, if you're willing to go vegan, you could double your lifespan and still have the same effect on the Earth. Besides, living longer might make us more invested in our planet's future. Maybe instead of kicking the climate change ball down the road for later generations to deal with, we'd be more willing to take such issues more seriously. What about the cost of age-related therapies and treatments? They might be really expensive, and if they are, only the rich would be able to live longer, increasing inequality in the world. The one problem with this critique is that it applies to basically every other technology we've ever created. So computers or telephones. Though it's true that many medical treatments start off only available to the rich, the high price they pay actually incentivizes companies to continue producing more new medical treatments and drugs. Eventually, these costs come down. We all have phones, and more people can benefit. Though it's true that we should probably do something about the fact that medical treatments, especially new high-tech ones, are very expensive originally, it's a bad reason not to do any research in the first place. Another problem some people have when thinking about defeating aging is that they think maybe extending lifespan would open a door to all types of other enhancements, even genetic enhancements. And we'd end up with sort of designer babies with perfect IQs and fantastic athletic abilities. And this might create a huge division between people who are enhanced and people who aren't. Even if you think those types of enhancements are bad, there's a big difference between them and extending health span. All I'm talking about is simply avoiding age-related diseases, preserving health for a longer proportion of life, not changing it or improving on it. In the developed world, the vast majority of deaths are age-related. This means, in the world as a whole, 100,000 deaths per day. It's my hope that more research into the primary cause, aging, will help reduce that number. I've been saying if, probably, and hopefully a lot in this talk. And that's because this field of research really is only just getting started. As amazing as it seems, we are really only beginning to understand why and how our bodies deteriorate so predictably. But if we can all agree that aging is a terrible thing and that we might actually be able to do something, we have to ask ourselves, do we have a moral obligation to try?